you speak of monsters and superheroes, but that's the stuff of myth and fairy tales. Reality, truth, it's rarely so simple. People are not so easily defined. Only by facing all of ourselves, the good and the bad, can we become whole. A quote from, of all places, Stranger Things. Put a pin in that. We'll be discussing that show in an upcoming episode of Totally Irrelevant Media Reviews. Welcome to the return from hiatus episode of the almost daily ZenCast. Let's kick things off with a fresh new slice of Discotheque Synthetica, the original digital robot rock dance music created lovingly for you, dear audience, by myself and my imaginary sidekick, DJ Zed. Here is a brand new track entitled Urgency Rock Groove, a dark electro rock remix live entertainment audio package. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast, an experimental freeform talk radio style audio blog podcast entertainment show listened to in over 20 countries around the world. Eccentric yet humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, exploring the radical intersection of politics, society, current events, and transcendent spirituality. Warning, this show is unorthodox, real, raw, and radically unscripted. Mature themes and the occasional use of adult language in moderation. This show is intended to be a civil, adult, respectful space for civilized public discourse. Personal anecdotes, creative ideas, social satire, theoretical theories, online content references, and all other original intellectual property expressed on this show are, except for when otherwise indicated, entirely those of the online creative performance artist and content creator known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Hello and namaste, my friends and internet fams from around the world. Welcome back. It's been a hot minute. For those of you who've been around long enough, you know that I tend to take a break right around a big season change. So, during the beginning of the summer heat wave, I tend to take a little bit of a hiatus, mostly to attend to, personal matters that are none of your business, and, focus on a little bit of self-care and whatnot. But we are back, friends, and this show will be coming at you a little bit more daily and a little less almost as we move forward through the ever-increasing global climate change that most people are in denial of, and all the other wild and wacky current events that'll crop up during the rest of the summer season. How on earth are you all doing? I hope you're well, and I hope if you are facing challenges in your personal life, that you are surrounded by people that can facilitate you. And if you need help, I hope that you remember that help is out there. Okay, friends, thank you for tuning in, and welcome to any and all new listeners. And a special extra shout out of gratitude and thanks to all you fans who've been grinding along and listening to the show during the hiatus. I see the numbers creeping along, and it is deeply appreciated. Also, as a matter of a point of order and programming notes, I was recently looking at my analytics data and reviewing the top most listened to episodes of the past year. So from July 8th to July 8th, the following shows have been listened to the most. Surprisingly, yet not, totally not surprisingly, the number one most listened to episode of this humble little podcast show remains the episode entitled Yeshua Christos. It has been topping the charts ever since I posted it, and it remains, I think over the last 3 years now, the single number one most listened to or downloaded episode in the entire show. Which is fascinating and exciting to me. Good times. I'd love to get some feedback on what everyone thinks about that and all the other episodes in the top list, which include some of the following titles. Good Morning 2021, which was, I think, my New Year's episode, top of the year 2021. Curiously, an experimental little episode that I created back when I was contemplating or experimenting with Twitch and the online game streaming content creation over there, the Mech Arena Mania pilot episode. It's number 2 most downloaded episode of this past year. Number 3, The Statement of Purpose for the Almost Daily ZenCast, a show in which I explicitly focus on what it is I'm doing and why, which may not be obvious at first glance if you're just tuning in to a random or the most recent episode of the show. At position number 4, episode 471, which apparently I didn't have the energy to come up with a unique title for. Same for episode 6, or the 6th most listened to episode number 454. I didn't give it a specific episode, and because of that, I have no idea what they are about, but there you go. The 7th most listened episode of the past year is the 1-year anniversary special episode, part 1. It was a multi-part episode, but part 1 of that has remained up here on the top. I think it's like 100. I don't know, 50, 25. I don't know. I haven't actually counted this list up, but here we go. Just to give a shout out and a reference to anyone joining the show for the very first time who's curious about what the top most listened to episodes. Here you go. I'm sorry there's no way for me to provide easy navigation links as of right now, but hopefully you can get on to the Sprecher.com or whatever other of the many platforms you can listen to this show on, and you can track them down if your curiosity is piqued. I think this is episode number 8 out of the list of most listened to episodes over the past year on the use, function, and absence of belief. Belief is in quotes in the title for a reason. Number 9, Happy Cornucopia of Gratitude Day, episode 472, which I believe, if memory serves, I created right around Thanksgiving, not too long ago. A couple of more episodes take up spots. Wait, where are we? 1, 2, 3. They're not numbered. It's an unnumbered list. So I wish there was a number. Here, feature request. DearSprecher.com. Could you add numbers to this list of the most listened to episodes? I know that'd probably be a hassle, but it should also be not too complicated to program. So we're trying to figure it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So episodes 10 and 11 on this list are episode 429, episode 453. Again, no individuated titles on those, so no idea what they're about, but they seem to be going strong. Number 12, if I'm keeping track correctly in my head, an episode entitled Wu Li Masters Dancing, part of the special sub-series or special segment series entitled Unauthorized and Explicit Readings. For those of you unfamiliar with the special subvariant episodes, I haven't been doing them very much lately, but they're all the ones that I have created are out there to be found and listened to. There's a couple of different specialty sub-series of episodes that I occasionally do, including unauthorized and explicit readings, as well as totally irrelevant media reviews, and a few others. Episode 13 on the most listened to list of episodes for the last year, Belief, Part 2, which is either a follow-up to On the Function, Use, and Absence of Belief, or a completely different episode series where I was focusing on belief, a theme and topic that comes up quite often, not only in the world, but in our public discourse about events in the world, about which I have some particularly specific ideas. I really am particular about word usage, and I'm a big promoter of specificity, especially around such broad and often misapplied ideas such as belief and their variants like blind faith. But moving on, number 14, episode called Meta Thesis Core Pillar Explained. That's got to do with the overall overarching thesis of all of my creative content creation projects, which are available online on various platforms. If you're curious about that, please head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, and you can find all the links for all the places you can listen to this podcast, as well as links to all the other platforms that represent the many dimensions of the quote-unquote Zeppoverse, which is, the way I brand my cloud of different online creation content projects. I think we're on 15 in terms of this little countdown. 1202221. A little celebration and discussion about Palindrome Ambigram Day, one of those quirky little number things that happens every once in a while on a systemic calendar system. Don't remember what I said, but it seems to be a pretty popular episode. The next episode is day 234, which I believe refers to the number of days into the Trump presidency. That might be part of the special segment series, Good Morning Trumptopia. For those of you curious about my opinions and discussions about Trump and his time in administration at the White House, you might want to dig around and check out all of the Good Morning Trumptopia special episodes, as they were my criticism, critiques, and concerns about Trump and his administration relatively in real time during the last 5 years. Okay. TNG, which is... Oh, what does that acronym stand for? TNG. I don't remember what TNG stands for. Do I need to open that up and see what the... I need to open that... Oh, I don't think I can from here. But it was a crossover episode between that and Cannabis Talk. Episode 436. TNG. What? I should know what my own acronyms mean, but I'll be honest with you. Right this hot second, it doesn't come up. Error file not found. The next episode, The Dangling Pardons Giveaway, a GMT special episode, number 441 for the Almost Daily ZenCast. Remember when Trump was just offering everyone pardons? Well, I had a few things to say about that. The next most popular episode, episode 432, again, no special title for that, followed up by, again, another crossover episode from when I was initially exploring my work over on Twitch, as I like to do a little bit of crossover on the different platforms when it's possible. That's a Twitch live podcast simulcast. The 17th, I think, if my counting in my head is continuing to be correct, the 17th most popular episode of the past year has been episode 451 with the title Healing. That's a big red pin on the imaginary corkboard of the theater of our minds, which is a whole analogy for a little gimmick I use in this show and on the stream show, which I've explained several times, and I'm sure I'll explain again, so I won't bore you with those details now, but tune in and find out. The next most popular episode, World Greetings Meme Behind the Scenes. That was a behind-the-scenes episode talking about my random meme creation process. I was a little disappointed in the way that episode turned out, but it's up here on the list of most popular episodes, so there you go. The next one was entitled Memo Gate Distractions and hashtag MeTooHealing. Followed up by Conflict in Ukraine Continues, episode 452, the Almost Daily ZenCast. Subsequent to that, down on the list, an episode entitled Critical Juncture. And then followed up by another Good Morning Trumptopia episode entitled Reinstatement Prophecy Postponed. How are all those Trumptopian QAnon prophecies going? I wonder how many QAnon followers are still clinging on to that idea of waiting for the storm. The next two episodes, again, no specific title, episodes 435 and episodes 464. The next episode on the list is episode 437, which is weirdly just says, Good Morning Trumptopia, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast. And then I'm not surprised this episode continues to stay on the top 30 or 40 or 50 most popular shows of the year. Welcome to the Zeppoverse, a warning politics episode. I don't think it's supposed to say politics. It's supposed to say warning and disclaimer politics. Episode number 439. And then the next one after that, totally irrelevant media review, although I did not indicate which piece of media I was reviewing. A little bit of a mystery waiting for us there. Followed by 2022 Day 1, episode 433, which is then followed by an episode entitled With Clarity We Could. A deleted episode, tragically, somewhere during the last 365 days, Sprecher.com decided that music-only episodes were no longer allowed. They are now explicitly verboten, which was not the case before. As those of you who were around back in the day when I read the entire the end user license agreement that I must comply with on Sprecher.com, that was a while back. That was a long and arduous read, which I found interesting people listen to. Anyways, the next one, Year's End Eulogy, episode 430. Followed up by Happy Holidays, episode 431. And then Election Cycle Cometh, episode 464. And then just under that, Laura Ingraham said, "What?" on Fox News. That was a fun episode. I don't watch a lot of Fox News. I'm not like hyper. I do. I cycle through all the different news platforms on the television to get a sense across the range of approaches as to what's going on. But for the record, I'm not one of those blind faith news junkies that just believes everything my preferred news agency puts out. Although I do indeed have a preferred news agency, I'm well aware of the flaws inherent in big corporate news media. But I also do not buy into any of the more outrageous conspiracy theory claims about the news. Because, have you met the human species? At any rate, I digress. The next episode on the list, GMT, The Madness Rages On. Followed up by Good Morning Trumptopia 2022, episode 434. And then recapping the past 5 years and announcing a new side project, episode 436. Memory is totally failing me, and I'm not entirely sure what that new side project may or may not have been. I suspect it was probably an announcement about the fact that I was expanding over onto Twitch, both to conduct live video versions of the podcast, as well as a sort of recap of past audio-only episodes, and as well as, of course, some gaming content. I totally lost track of what number we're on, but we're going to power through to the end of this list just so that I can, hopefully spur more interest in these most listened to episodes and get even more people to listen to them. A breaking news episode. That's what NBN. What is TNG? TNG. I gotta look up what TNG is. Bugging me. I don't know my own acronym. But breaking news. Trump lawyers said what on TV? Because the Trump lawyers have said some wild and wacky things. But this is one of the more outrageous moments in the history of Trump lawyers saying cuckoo, crazy, nut job things on live television. The next episode in the most listened to episodes of the entire year so far, and I mean from July to July, Preemptive Pretext Paradox episode 445, followed by episode 453 with no specific title given, and then coming full circle, Summer Hiatus Return Part 3. I wonder where Part 3 is more popular, is on this list, and I haven't seen Summer Hiatus Return Part 1 or 2. But there it is. Summer Hiatus Return Part 3 from last year. The next episode, 458, TNZ Cosmic Mind Fractals. Oh, I remember what TNZ means. Today's Nugget of Zen. But what does TNG mean? I gotta remember what that is. I gotta figure that out. I should be on top of my own acronyms. Followed by episode 442, no specific title given. And then Up versus Down, episode 443. That was a discussion about the curious way in which people use, because it's not a past tense thing, people often use a sort of forced and flawed logic in their argumentation about things that appear to me to be deeply interrelated, which I then create the analogy. Would you argue that only up is real and that down is a hoax or a lie or a scam, when clearly up and down are inherently interrelated? They co-create one another in terms of being a polemic. Put a pin in all that. Go check out that episode. Yet another deleted episode that's on the list. Oh, I never read the title of the deleted episode because I guess it was... There's a few episodes that I've had to delete because they were just random all music episodes, because I thought that might be interesting to sort of sprinkle throughout. But then that was explicitly called out in an update to the EULA for Sprecher.com, which I'm a fan of keeping up to date on my EULAs to the best of my ability. Because, I clicked yes to a legally binding contract, right? For those of you who've never put any deep thought into that, put a pin on the board. We've already discussed it several times, and I'm sure we'll come full circle and talk about it again. But, I encourage everyone to put a little bit more thought into, and a little bit more effort into actually reading the end user license agreements, EULA. EULA. For those of you who are not familiar with the acronym term, those are legally binding contracts that you click yes to quite absentmindedly whenever you download and begin using a new application or join a new website, etc. Okay, moving on. Episode 452, Happy Juneteenth. TNG. Discussing a Living Cosmology. Episode 440. Let me see if any of these explain what TNG it means. No. Oh. For some reason, I have a bunch of episodes that are actually today's nugget of Zen with the totally incorrect acronym TNG. That's what's going on. No wonder I wasn't sure what on earth it meant. I'd better see about trying to fix that up just for the overall look of it and for posterity. That should read TNZ. I wonder if that's some sort of autocorrect flub that I wasn't catching in time as I was creating those episodes. Well, moving on and wrapping up this list of the most listened to episodes over the last 365 days. Logos in all caps. Put a pin in that one, friends. If you haven't listened to that episode, I humbly encourage you to go check it out. That is a subject of deep importance and relevance to just about everything that comes out of my mouth. And something that takes quite a bit of, exploring to fully vet out and explain. Okay. Moving on. The Batman, a totally irrelevant media review. Episode 455. There's, followed up by, there's the other Summer Hiatus episode. Summer Hiatus Part 1. From last year, right around this time. And then after that, Peace, episode 447. And then Summer Hiatus Part 2 from this time last year. And then the episode 446, followed by Wattpad Wednesdays, a podcast raw recording. I've been tinkering on and off over the last year with capturing original ideas for my literary work, which is integrated into the Zeppoverse and has a bit of crossover with this real-life political social commentary podcast for reasons that are way too long to get into now, but that totally make sense. But and that, of course, I ramble about whenever I do a Wattpad Wednesdays related podcast. Wattpad, for those of you who are not familiar, is a social media platform for undiscovered authors, novelists, and writers of all kinds looking to connect with readers who enjoy discovering hitherto undiscovered authors. Some might remember that, curiously, that was the platform from which 50 Shades of Grey initially found its growing cult following audience and then was ultimately discovered by the professional publishing world, which led to, of course, the hit book and the wildly popular movies, which never made any sense to me because, I don't mean to sound rude, but that original book as presented on Wattpad was literally almost illegible, like just impossibly tedious to read. But there you go. Things get discovered regardless of the quality level. Okay, moving on with the list. Sending you love and energy. Followed by Where Does Spiritual Healing Truly Begin? And then Programming Notes, episode 448. And then More Deep Thinky Thoughts, episode 450. I'm surprised that this episode has survived, because I'm actually surprised I didn't delete it. But I guess my calculated thought must have been that I talked enough in between the musical tracks to keep this episode up, despite the change in the end user license agreement on Sprecher.com. It is entitled a, quote, Shut Up and Dance, close quote, episode 2020. The next episode on the list, Duality and Non-Duality, where I go into, my thoughts about that particular paradox of mutually co-creating polemics. Next episode on the list of most listened to episodes for the past year, Part 2, The Problem with the Problem. Episode 457 of the Almost Daily ZenCast. And then, I'm skipping the titles of the only music episodes because it's irrelevant. But then we've got VP Selected, which I believe's got to do with my thoughts about when Vice President Harris was announced before the election. And then By Any Other Name, episode 444. Episode 454, What Just Happened? And then Tucker Carlson said, what? That's when I started doing that, because occasionally these talking heads on the news say stuff, and my only reaction is, they just said, what? In the vein of that old audio meme from whatever movie that's originally from. Okay, moving on, almost at the end of the list. An episode entitled January 6th. And then episode 449. Curiously, really low on this list, but I'm also kind of surprised it's on the list at all, given it's the most recent episode that I dropped right before going on summer hiatus. Georgia Standing Stones Mystery Solved. Episode 472. If you are now caught up in the frenzy of Georgia Standing Stone conspiracy theory content that has been exploding online in a cornucopia of chaotic nonsense, please do check out that episode. Because I had plenty of things to say about it from a while back. I mind you, this episode is from before the recent breaking news about the apparent explosion that demolished one of the four Georgia Standing Stones, which have apparently now been demolished by the state of Georgia. We'll put a pin in that. We're going to come full circle and be discussing that cornucopia of wildly conflicting new conspiracy theory content in the coming days and weeks as we move forward with the show on a much more daily basis. The next most popular episode, coming down the list from the most popular to the least, Time is Money, or so they say, followed by Leaked Draft Causes Uproar on Both Sides of the Political Aisle, episode 456, which, if I'm not mistaken, was my response and reaction to the leaked preview of the subsequent SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States. For those of you who may not be aware of what the acronym term SCOTUS represents, that is the Supreme Court of the United States, they leaked their draft decision several months before they announced that they would quite hypocritically choose to overturn the legal standing precedent of stare decisis for the last 50 years regarding Roe versus Wade as a legal decision in this country. I have yet to do an episode in response to their ultimate overturning of Roe versus Wade because I've been on summer hiatus during that time. But for those of you curious what I thought about the leak back when it happened, there you go. Skipping a couple of more music-only episodes to tell you about Late Night Thoughts with Muzak. That's another special series that I do occasionally when the insomnia hits and I'm up with pensive thoughts in the middle of the night. Late Night Thoughts. I haven't been doing them very recently, but that's one of the series that will be hitting again more often, along with the other ones I've already referenced. By the way, if I don't call out a specific series, then I just consider them part of the regular content of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Some would argue that there's no need to differentiate into different special series, but for me, it's a way of organizing them according to related themes or subject matters to differentiate between just sort of a general overall discussion of things going on in the world. The next couple of titles on the list of the most popular episodes of this past year from July to July, Humanity Hits a Critical Juncture, followed by we must resist the urge to hate. And then going back a bit to 2020, I believe, real-time commentary during the final presidential debate. And then High Holy Days Special, Part 1, Episode 382. Oh, wow, that one goes back quite a ways. The lower the number on the episode, the further back it goes, of course. All right. Episode 459, entitled Yet Another Incident and Yet No Real Change. I'm sure that's an episode where I discuss my thoughts on the series of ever-escalating violent mass shootings here in good old the land of the free, the country formerly known as the United States of America, currently transitioning back from being known as Trumptopia. Fun fact, I do believe I may very well be, well, I shouldn't call it a fact. I have not actually been able to confirm it as a global fact, but I know that I started using the term Trumptopia in response to Trump announcing that he would run for office. That's why I started the special series, Good Morning Trumptopia. And I think I may very well be the person that coined Trumptopia and Trumptopians. And let me be, the reason I'm taking a moment to go on a sidebar about this terminology, I want it to be understood. For me, I'm not intending that to be interpreted as a pejorative or spiteful term. It's just a way to call the political pseudo-religious ideology of the Trump movement, which I hear other people call Trumpeteers. I think that's a bit saucy, weak. It's like tries to be snarky, but it's not because it's a little bit too Disney. And as well as other ones. I have to be honest, folks, I'm a little disappointed that Trumptopia and Trumptopians did not catch on. Maybe it is because I wasn't using it in spite or a hateful way, but it is what it is. All right, moving on with the list. Episode 462. No specific title given. Followed by The Matrix and Our Illusion of Control Through Violence. Let me put a special little sidebar here about the term matrix. I was speaking earlier about my predilection, my preference for specificity in language. That's a word or a term that I've got a bit of a beef or a bit of an axe to grind about how it is, in my opinion, being misused. Due to some degree because of the popularity of the Matrix movies, which I do not have any issue with. I love those movies. Totally enjoyed them, totally fascinated by what they have to say, etc. But I think it's also important to disambiguate, my friends. I made a meme specifically about it, which is floating out there on the internet, based on the "what if I told you" verbal mean or use of that term, and the Orpheus offering you the red pill and the blue pill image. What if I told you that everyone, well, most everyone, is misusing the term The Matrix? I'll drop into this because I think it's important enough to expand upon here now, even though this is supposed to be a teaser thing to get people to go listen to these episodes. The term The Matrix, as I understand it, being commonly used in today's contemporary postmodern public discourse, both by self-proclaimed spiritual people as well as self-proclaimed conspiracy theorists, although technically they're not so much making theories as they are believing in content that they find on the internet, but that's a whole nother issue, a whole nother discussion. The way this Venn diagram of different people seem to be trying to use the term matrix and trying to popularize it is inherently deeply flawed. I understand it to mean the total sum of all ideological constructs and mental systems that are inherently part of our postmodern society and seen as either flawed or corrupt or downright nefariously evil. But here's the problem, folks. if I may expound on this for another hot second, if you do a little bit of actual research, and I mean going a little bit further back beyond the creation of the movie series, The Matrix, it can be discovered that the original, ancient, spiritual, mystical meaning of the term, its definition is the living, universal mother womb. Autocorrect, or rather voice to text, almost always misrenders that as living room, the room in your house, but I mean the cosmic uterus in which all life is gestating. Okay? And for the very reason that its ancient meaning is that, the source of life, the cosmic incubation of all life by the very living universe, as opposed to the drastically different, very, completely unrelated use of the term now. To me, I think it's an urgent issue, especially if you're taking yourself really seriously as a so-called spiritual person or a so-called conspiracy theory person, or you're in the Venn diagram overlap of those two circles. Because if you're using the word wrong, then you're tending to, in my humble opinion, draw flawed, erroneous, and misleading conclusions. But I digress. Go check out that episode. And of course, keep a pin on the board for all the other episodes, because I talk about this in multiple episodes in an attempt to weave a thread that connects all the dots. Okay, moving on, almost there at the end of this list. Current events overload. Episode 450, news breaking news. Stop saying it ain't real. Totally irrelevant media review featuring DJ Yassi. What is CT? CT is... I forget. Let's see if the image helps me remember. But the title is The World Was Always Green. Oh yeah, CT is Cannabis Talk. I think I eventually updated it to CT 420 because all my other acronyms have 3 elements in it, like Late Night Thoughts or LNT. Exodus under the cover of COVID, ? Is the next most popular episode, followed by Civil Action versus Political Ideology. There's an episode I find applicable today, regardless of whenever it came out, as we are often caught up in arguing over political ideology instead of being invested in public civic action. Another versus episode, Judgment versus Discernment. If you haven't sat down to really explore for yourself the difference between those two words and the ramifications of the way you might use those words, I humbly invite you to check out that episode, Judgment versus Discernment. I think this is a GMT episode, but tragically I didn't give it the full citation in the title. Words, words, words coming out of his mouth. The next most popular episode, GMT, Good Morning Trumptopia, A New Beginning. Followed by Late Night Thoughts, Idolatry of Ideology. I've got some things to say about ideological constructs, the way they're used, and what we are called to do about it, spiritually speaking. The next most popular episode on the list, Happy Ascension Day, which is a historically long-standing Christian holiday, which, remarkably, most Christians today, if you surveyed 2,000 Christians, I'd be wagering a bet, and I'm not a betting man, but I would speculate to say that fewer than 20% of them would recognize Ascension Day. Many of them because it's probably considered more of a Catholic holiday. Of course, Catholics consider themselves Christians, but most American non-denominational or other denominational Christians don't consider Catholics real Christians. which is an interesting argumentation amongst people that all supposedly believe in the same dude. Moving on, the next most popular episode, episode 451. No specific title given. Followed by GMT, Good Morning Trumptopia, Judiciary Committee Partisan Showdown. And then Pendulum Swing Extremity Tolerance Test Theory. I go into detail there about my very poorly constructed theory, because as always, friends, I will be the first to admit to you that I do not pretend to be an expert in anything. I do not pretend to be an authority in anything. I'm just a dude with a series of ideas and opinions and media outlets with which to express them. Anyways, I've got a political ideological construct theory that, particular to the United States, that there is a pendulum swing tolerance test going on during the course of the height of the popularization of Trumptopian thinking. Moving on, an episode inspired by a meme I wish I had made, which someone else beat me to the punch. Fear is a liar, so do not let it in. The next most popular episode is entitled 2020 is Almost Over, followed by TJC 002, Restarting the Reboot. What does TJC mean? That's another special series segment title I haven't used in a while. Oh, right. That's my tarot-related series, which I've been postponing that for ages. For those of you interested in tarot, I'm not a blind faith believer. I am a curious agnostic that has had a series of interesting experiences with the system known as tarot. Anyways, there's a whole long backstory there, because that was the original impetus to even starting a podcast, which I then immediately postponed and tabled indefinitely, and have only sort of occasionally flirted with trying to reboot, and have totally failed to effectively restart. But neither here nor there, really. Moving on with the list. How long is this list? Where does it end? I think I'm going to just have to cut it off, because it just keeps... As I scroll, I see more episodes being added. The next episode in popularity in terms of the most listened to episodes over the past year, in descending order, 13 Days, followed by Coffee Alt Replacement Challenge. That's when I started getting into the three different mushroom alternative to coffee that I'm really, really jazzed about. Followed by episode 429, episode 437, no specific titles given, and then Happy April 20th from April 20th, 2021, episode 442, episode 444, and then breaking news, McCarthy flips after flopping. All right, that's enough of rambling about that, friends. Thank you so much to everyone who's been tuning in and listening to the shows, especially as I've been away on hiatus. I cannot believe I have already been rambling for 48 minutes and 31 seconds. I was totally imagining in my head as I was reading that list that it might have been 20 some odd minutes. Way overdue for a new bit of music. Let's clear out that last track and drop into this next one, Tribal Robot Dance, a deep electronica remix live audio acid digital performance by your favorite fictional character, animatronic, infamous DJ, DJ Zed. If you appreciate the digital robot dance music that we present here on the Almost Daily ZenCast, I humbly invite you to visit soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo, where you can enjoy the creme de la creme, the very best of this music we like to call discotheque synthetica, without the hassle of me jibber-jabbering over a portion of it. And of course, you listening to that music helps to support not only the creation of this music, but also all the other content on all the other platforms of the Zeppoverse. So head on over to soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. Get yourself a free account and start rocking out to DJ Zed's Discotheque Synthetica tunes. Some of those are actually exclusive to SoundCloud and have never been played on the podcast. And others are, of course, favorites from the podcast. Thank you so much for your enjoyment and your support. DJ Zed sure knows how to leave you wanting more. At least I'm always feeling that way after tuning into a track. Thank you so much for enjoying that. Okay, moving on. I want to take one more moment to sort of send more shout-outs and thank yous. This show is described as a podcast listened to in 20-plus countries around the world. I just checked out the list of top countries for, downloads and listenings over the past year, July 8th to July 8th. And the list is now at 25 countries, which is a beautiful thing, something I'm excited. No, what's going on there? Boom. I'm quite excited and kind of thrilled by. So I want to say thank you. And there was that one episode on the list I just read from that was International Greetings meme or something along those lines. It's because I made a meme saying greetings and salutations in the various languages from the countries on this list. Well, at least the countries that were on the list back whenever I made the meme. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't, and I should have thought of this before I came back on live, but oh well. I just want to say a heartfelt thank you and shout out to everyone in the following countries who are currently listening to this show on a regular basis. In reverse order from least listened to, not reverse order, in order from least listened to most. Here we go. Thank you so much, and shout out hello to people in Saudi Arabia, Russia, Italy, Spain, Czechia, Chile, Turkey, Philippines, South Africa, Ireland, Barbados, the Netherlands, Australia, Japan, I'm sorry. I misread Austria just now before Japan as Australia, and I was momentarily confused as to why Australia would be on the list twice. Of course it's not. So, Netherlands, Austria, Japan, Australia, Mexico, France, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Cyprus, India, and for the first time in a long time, at the top of the list, these great old United States of America / Trumptopia. Thank you so much, folks, for listening. I am deeply, deeply filled with great, great gratitude and excited to be back after taking a bit of a hiatus. Okay. So there's way too much that's gone on in the past few weeks in my, during my absence from doing the podcast regular, to even begin to dig into all of the different cans of worms that have been opened up. But let me start by saying a few things succinctly about some of the bigger events in recent highlights. Just to sort of get things down on the record for anyone new to the show, wondering where I might stand on some of these things. The Supreme Court of the United States was wrong, in my humble opinion, to overturn Roe versus Wade. And it was wrong for many reasons, not the least of which being that those supposedly honorable justices installed by the Trumpublicans, which is my second favorite term for Trumptopia, but it's also very specifically disambiguating or discerning the narrow difference between people who remain traditional Republicans and Republicans who have converted to the cult of Trumtopian thinking. But I digress. These installed justices committed perjury during their what are they called? The whatchamahoozle hearings. Their confirmation hearings, okay? And that, dear friends, is no small thing. If you, or anyone you know, if an ordinary Joe Schmo on the street commits perjury in a court of law, regardless of what else that case might be about, charges and indictments will be brought against those perjuries, and time will be served. Okay? So that begs the question, what are we going to do about these lying, two-faced justices that literally committed perjury in a legal context and have yet to face the consequences of that? They committed perjury quite clearly and quite plainly and quite explicitly when they, having taken an oath by swearing on a holy Bible, which most of them, purporting to be Christian, should have valued quite deeply, when they then followed up, that taking of an oath and answered the question about their position on Roe versus Wade, they all quite patently said it is established law, stare decisis applies, it is precedent, we will respect it as such. Now, defenders of these Trumtopian puppets that were installed in the literal highest court of the land will say that they didn't lie, they changed their mind abruptly. But anyone who's familiar with the realities involved in their appointment and the 50-year-long history of the extreme right wing of the Republican Party pushing for the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and the 50 years of a private right-wing extreme think tank encouraging and or demanding that certain justices be installed, will realize that this was a planned and, how else to describe it? I don't want to dare call it a conspiracy, but this was a planned effort to mislead the people on the confirmation hearing board and the American public. They bold-facedly lied that they would comply with the law, which they're supposed to uphold, because it was established, by the jurisdiction of stare decisis, which is the legal doctrine that precedent in law, when established and then tested repeatedly by different cases that challenge it or that question that precedent, it creates a body of work or a body of legal decisions that enforce it as precedent. I'm not sure if I'm explaining stare decisis well enough to satisfy actual lawyers, but that's my general sort of dude on the street understanding. It's a funny, weird, almost poetic term, which has nothing to do with the stars, right? But it's Latin, I believe, or it is derived from Latin. So there's that, friends. I want to be clear and unambiguous. I am pro-choice because it is a woman's right to privacy that covers the legal question of whether or not only the right to privacy, but the right to self-autonomy. Now, there's deep and complex issues and ramifications that are going to be dealt with by the American public due to this decision to be overturned, by the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. A lot of people who are celebrating this decision are championing it as a win for democracy because it means that the legal decision about what to do regarding abortion has now been kicked down to the states. This is a huge can of worms with multiple dimensions to it and multiple levels with ever increasingly grosser worms involved. But I digress. At the core of it, in my humble opinion, and again, I do not pretend to be a legal expert, right? I have never claimed to be one. But based on my admittedly limited understanding, we live in a federalist republic, right? In which there's supposed to be a balancing check and a check and balances system between what the states want and what the federal government is deciding. And now, while there's all kinds of criticisms, and of course absurd, wildly irrational, and irrelevant claims that can and have been made about the states and the federal government, the irony is that the most immediate reaction of this decision taken by the Supreme Court is that Texas and other states like it that either had trigger laws waiting in the wings to be activated, some for as long ago as 30 years or so, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. At any rate, there have been laws on the books inactive because they couldn't be passed in state legislations, but were sort of approved as trigger laws. In other words, inactive laws that would only come into play if Roe versus Wade were to be overturned. And as we've all now have come to understand, the Texas law, which was implemented now, I don't know that that was a trigger law, okay? So I don't mean to be miscategorizing it. It might have actually come into play somewhere in the awkward time between the release of the leaked decision and the actual announcement that they had finally overturned Roe versus Wade. But that Texas law places the burden of policing, of upholding the law, of implementing its mechanisms, not on any state agency, but on the citizens of Texas. So if you take a big enough zoom back and connect all the dots, at the federal level, a morally questionable and obviously corrupt president pulled a bunch of shenanigans to install Supreme Court justices that were dictated to him by the Heritage Foundation, or whatever that think tank is called. I think it's the Heritage Foundation. There's a few very extremely conservative think tanks and I believe it is the Heritage Foundation that are the ones that go, here are the judiciary nominees we would like to see. They dictated to Trump who to appoint. These justices then created the space for a state to create a law that not only strips away a woman's right to privacy and autonomy, but also places the burden to enforce that law on the citizens of Texas, creating a snitch and rat culture of just complete, radically irresponsible use of personal discretionary thinking as to who should be punished by this law. The implications of which are ridiculous, and how anyone can support that and not see that it is quite literally the kind of federal and state overreach decried by the far right as what everything the left is doing. It boggles the mind. So obviously I stand in support of all women to have the freedom and the right to choose for themselves. Okay? Now, there's so many issues we can get into, ranging from the obvious and pathetic and painfully sad hypocrisy of the ideological constructs of the pro-life movement, right? I mean, there's deep flaws in all the things that they talk about, not the least of which is they don't adopt kids very much now, and they keep pretending that they're going to adopt all the kids that won't get aborted, right? As one wonderfully stated meme, which has beautifully gone viral, says, and I'm totally reduxing it down to a simple statement, if it was really about babies, we would have better services for mothers and their babies. But what have we actually experienced over the last 30 years? The Republicans have systematically attacked, vilified, and stripped away social services that support mothers and their babies, shaming women at every turn. But there's so much there's so much more going on there besides that set of problematic issues, not the least of which is that these conservative ideologues have for decades been openly declaring, the series of things they would like to abolish in America, right? So apparently they, have a whole domino list of things that they want to just knock over, including but not limited to gay rights overall, marriage rights for non-traditional marriages. But most deeply concerning is that their logic is rooted in an argument which is absolutely insane. Have you read either the leaked decision or the final set of papers produced by the SCOTUS? They literally argue for a rolling back of rights that were not originally listed in the Constitution. And here's where I find it really delightfully absurd. Most of the people blindly cheering and supporting this agenda do not seem to comprehend that the Bill of Rights, otherwise known as the constitutional amendments, were not included in the text of the original Constitution. Let's take a minute to really let that sink in. This includes their much beloved Second Amendment. I think a lot of these people need to invest in a dictionary and maybe, a history book. Of course, there's a lot of problematic issues with history books, as many people love to shout about, but at least a dictionary so that they can wrap their brains around that their beloved Second Amendment and all of the arguments they attach to it would be stripped away if this agenda is allowed to continue and these conservative think tanks achieve what they want. Okay? And I'll button that whole line of thinking with this. If you haven't read the American Constitution in its original form, the text before the amendments were added to it, the only people and the only rights attributed to them, the only people acknowledged to have rights in the original Constitution were white, landowning slaveholders. If you didn't own land and you didn't own slaves and you weren't white, whatever that meant, because there was a really weird narrow definition of white back in the day that did not include a lot of other Europeans besides whatever narrow group of thinkers that considered themselves white at the time. Those folks didn't have rights, okay? Those folks, women, are not even mentioned in the Constitution. So their rights did not exist, okay? So if the Heritage Foundation and the Trumptopian QAnon cult gets what it wants, anyone and everyone that doesn't own land and doesn't own slaves isn't going to have any rights. Because the only people who were allowed to vote, as described by the Constitution in its original text, were white, landed, slave-owning gentry. Because, let's be honest, folks, despite all the romanticism and the myth-making about the Founding Fathers, they were mostly young, because they were way younger than most people assume that they were. Based on the paintings as depicted, I think a lot of people think the Founding Fathers were like in their late 50s and early 60s. But they were actually, most of them, under the age of 30. Very few of them were actually 30, and even less of them were close enough to get, to be considered middle-aged. I think only one of them was 40 or above. And they were all oligarchs. They were all landowning, slave-owning, capitalists with power. Okay? So even if we set aside the entire argument about the pseudo-bullshit religious morality about how evil and wrong abortion is, which is a whole episode we can do. We can do a 3-part episode breaking down that argument and the hypocrisies of the people making that argument. The huge issue of the entire logic is ridiculous and deeply problematic as we continue to move forward and this Supreme Court continues to check off the to-do items on the agenda that is being driven by, guess what? Dun, 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 middle-aged or older, white, wealthy men. Now, I got nothing against white men. A lot of white men assume that I am white, although I don't identify as that, which is a whole nother issue. I've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. If you want to know because you haven't heard, put a pin on it so that you remember over on the imaginary corkboard of our shared theater space in the mind, because we'll come back and circle back around. But that's a problem for a lot of Americans, right? If they're going to do this. If they're going to keep pushing that agenda. But I digress. We can talk about all of that quite deeply and extensively in a future episode. Oh, hey, I just missed 420. Ding! Happy 420, everyone. I'm currently on a break from consuming cannabis. For those of you who may or may not be aware that I am indeed a cannabis enthusiast, connoisseur, and proponent of it as a healing plant and modality of therapy. But I also realize and advocate for common sense boundaries, because it's not for everybody, and young people shouldn't be partying with it, just like they shouldn't be partying with alcohol until their bodies have developed enough in order to appropriately process that without it causing damage. Of course, in America, drinking till you're shit-faced, blackout, drunk, puking in the toilet is a coming-of-age tradition. Quite frankly, something I've never understood, neither as a young person before I even, was exposed to it directly by peer pressure, or since. And mind you, I enjoy me a good adult cocktail beverage. But I digress. So many other things have been going on, friends. So many other things. I just wanted to hit that point and acknowledge that in terms of the nexus of all the outrageous things being pushed and peddled by the extreme right, that's up there on the top shelf of the most egregiously alarming and kind of wild and wacky, like, what? How on the earth did they finally get away with doing that sort of issues, right? Okay. So many other things are going on that I can't even begin to get into them in this episode, and it's already way longer than I originally intended it to be. So I'm going to sign off here and tease you with this. I will be back almost daily to start really getting into all of those issues. So I thank you for tuning in for this initial reactivation of the podcast. And I'll leave you with this final thought, which may seem completely and totally unrelated, especially if you're new to the show. But I challenge you to find the dots and connect them. Okay? Because in my opinion, what I'm about to say is deeply related to everything going on. And with this final thought, this original quote of my own writing, I'll be signing off and saying thank you for tuning back in, and what else? Thank you for tuning back in, and gratitude for your support, and I'll be seeing you again soon. Let's close on this, friends. Just something to contemplate. And like I said, it may seem wild and bizarre and radically crazy and maybe even just too far-fetched to be considered real, but I challenge you to contemplate it deeply enough until you find how it interconnects with everything else that we talk about on this show. And I quote myself, "The very cosmos itself is not only conscious, but it is consciousness, manifesting all life." How does that relate to the things we just rambled about now, and the things we're going to ramble about in the coming days, and the things that I've been rambling about for your entertainment pleasure for the last 5.5, almost 6 years? Question mark. I leave it to you, friends, to question for yourselves and to think for yourselves about the stuff I talk about. Because let me leave you with this final proviso or disclaimer. I'm not here for blind faith agreeers. I'm not here to convince anyone that they're wrong. I'm not here to argue or to negate other people's ways of thinking. I'm here to express my own thoughts, which I've arrived at after a lifetime of questioning everything. And I'm encouraging you, dear listener, whether you're new, relatively new, or an old-timer, to question everything for yourself. And that includes my own ideas, my own statements, my own declarative, things I've declared. Because if we question everything together, and we question everything for the purposes of collaborative, civil, public discourse, and not for the nonsensical reasons of fighting in order to see who can fight the most to prove that they're right, then maybe, just maybe, friends, we might be able to transcend the illusory and objectively nonsensical engineered wedge issues that deprive us of unity. Because if there's one thing that I have consistently called out since Ronald Reagan was in office, is that this American culture is riddled with psychologically manipulative wedge issues that take opposing views and weaponize them so that people spend more time fighting with other people instead of building consensus, collaboratively questioning and contemplating everything, and developing solutions to the problems that we ourselves created. As always, friends, I thank you for tuning in. I'm going to sign off with one last bit of DJ Zed music for your audio entertainment entitled Cosmic Whispers, a Nebula Remix Live audio asset entertainment discotheque synthetica track created by your favorite fictional animatronic character from a book you haven't read, DJ Zed. If you appreciate this show, I humbly invite you to visit solo.to/Mr. Zeppo in order to explore the other various dimensions of the Zeppoverse. And I also hope you might share that link to anyone you think might appreciate this podcast and the other content discoverable at solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. It's easy to remember, and it's easy to share. solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. the Almost Daily ZenCast. Coming back a little bit more daily and a little bit less almost. Stay tuned for more.